When it comes to rendering animation in Vue, there's a couple of different options that we have available. First thing I'm going to do is hit F11 on the keyboard to pull up our timeline. Now, if the animation wizard pops up, which will look like this, you can just go ahead and close that out. And you also want to make sure that display this wizard when creating new object animation is turned and checked off if you don't want that to show up every single time you open your timeline. I'm going to go ahead and load in just a quick sphere now and scrub through our timeline just to about 10 seconds and then move our sphere over. And this way we've created an animation. It's very basic, but now we can access our animation options. So we're going to go up to the Animation tab and select Animation Render Options. First thing we'll see is we have our preset render quality. Now this is going to be exactly the same as we have in our regular render options. We also have the ability to edit and create our own user settings or access the render options directly through the animation rendering options just by clicking this edit button. We can see we have our animation limits up at the top, which means we can either render the entire animation, which right now would render just the section we have right now, but if we only wanted to render maybe 5 seconds of it, then we can select render sequence, which will allow us to select either a start frame or start time, along with an end frame and end time. So we'll only render within that area. We can also select our frame increment. So if we're working with 30 frames per second and we want a nice preview, what we can do is do a frame increment of 2 and play back our animation at 15 frames a second to get a decent, quick animation preview. So these increments can skip frames, and then all you really have to do is just play those animation backs at a different frame rate, and that way you'll be able to see a little bit quicker of a preview. Now we can see we have our channel files, which will allow us to save color, alpha, and depth map. And now these are separate from our gbuffer settings that we have in user settings. So if you want to enable your gbuffer, you want to make sure that you have at least the final preset render on in order to view your gbuffer. And if we take a look at our channel files, we can just go ahead and check these on and off depending on what we want. Alpha is our cutouts. If we're going to be compositing, this will give us black and white images showing us what's CG and what's not. And our depth is a nice option to have as well for compositing because it gives us a gradient depth information based on where objects are in the scene. And then we also have our gbuffer multipass options down here as well. We can turn those on. I'm going to go ahead and click to format options right now, and we're going to take a look at our different compressors and codecs that we have available. Now I'm using Windows right now, and Windows and Mac are going to have different codecs, but what we can do is access third-party codecs if we want, or we can render full frames uncompressed. Full frames is going to be a very, very large file, but we can also select DivX if we want, or we can also use QuickTime codecs, Microsoft codecs. So you really want to do a little bit of research to find out exactly what you should be working with. If you're working with a specific type of video editor, I would suggest using the codec from that video editor. And we can see underneath our multipass options, we now have frame rate. We can render at 5 frames, 10 frames, 15 frames a second, 24 for film, 25 for PAL resolution, and 30 for NTSC. We can also specify a specific user amount, so we can select exactly how many frames we want. We can set that to 7 frames, or anything that we actually want to have in the scene. So you have a lot of control over that within these options. We can also select our frame resolution here, which is also directly connected to our standard regular rendering option. So I can set that to 640 by 480, and then it will change it in our frame resolution in the animation rendering. And we can also select on here whether or not we want to use network rendering, the standalone renderer. If you're not on a network and you don't have any other computers you're going to be rendering on, then the standard renderer will be fine. If you are working on a network, then you might want to look up and see exactly what you need to do. If you're going to be running Hyperview or Renderable on your network, then you can use these settings to change that. And what we also have is autoplay animation when done. We can set that. And we also have advanced animation options. And I'm not going to be going too far in depth in here, but what we have is some illumination baking options. We can also change the pixel aspect ratio of our scene. Therefore, we can use NTSC, which is a 0.9, PAL, which is a 1.0667, and this is the size and pretty much the stretching for our pixels, whether or not we want them to be square or extruded or smaller. And it really depends on the video format you're working with. If you actually are working for television, you want to make sure that you're using the correct pixel aspect ratio. We can also change our anti-aliasing settings, we can do distant blurring, and then of course field interlacing, which also has to do with television. So when we're all ready with that, we can actually just come down here to the bottom and click Render Animation, and it will save out these files to where we've selected to save them. All you gotta do is click Browse to set that destination, and then of course name them.